We're going to talk today just a little bit about the choice of entity. I would say more than any topic that comes up in my first meetings with our companies after they join RevRoad, this is the thing that they want to talk about the most. And usually it's, do I need to remain an LLC? Should I remain an LLC? Should I convert to a C corporation? What are the pluses and minuses? Should I just start out as a C corporation if they haven't chosen yet? So this is the introductory slide. C corporation, LLC. We'll talk a little bit about why Delaware is so important, why it's so popular. A couple of caveats. First of all, there are more choices than just a C corporation or an LLC. Some companies are sole proprietorships. You could have an S corporation. We don't get a lot of applicant companies that are in those forms, and there are good reasons for that. So I'm going to focus on the C corporation and the LLC, and we'll talk at the end a little bit about why Delaware is so amazing for businesses. And I'm just going to discuss a few things like different contexts. First of all, governance and structure, comparing and contrasting the pros and cons of C corporations and LLCs. C corporations have well-defined accountability. They have roles that are set. They're created by law. Directors, you have officers, you have shareholders. Lots of predictability there, and I'm going to be repeating that point over and over today. A lot of formalities. This is something that turns founders off a lot. They look at the C Corp and they realize, to run this right, I'm going to have board meetings, regular shareholder meetings. I'm going to have bylaws that are detailed, and I have to run my company in accordance with those bylaws. Thanks, Jared. I need to take minutes of the board meetings and the shareholder meetings, and I need to make sure that everything I do is consistent with those minutes. So that can be seen as kind of onerous, and for an early stage founder, they might say it's not worth it. I'm going to just do an LLC. It's much simpler and easier. On the plus side, there's a lot of legal precedent around corporations. It's very predictable. There's a lot of law around it that can protect a founder and an early stage company. LLCs, by contrast, have much less formal operations. I've heard it said that the best thing about an LLC is that it's super flexible. You can run it however you want. The worst thing about an LLC is that it's super flexible and you can do whatever the heck you want. So it can be a problem if you don't pay attention to some of these things that the C corporation form requires you to pay attention to. So there's less uniformity in LLCs. If you have an LLC, you really need to have an operating agreement to make sure that you are addressing some key things. It's tempting to just set it up and run it and do whatever you want. The problem is when things arise, you need to have an operating agreement in place that will tell you, okay, this is how this should work. Here's the procedure for this scenario. So if you have an LLC and you don't have an operating agreement, you should get one in place. There's a lot less legal precedent around LLCs, that you have a lot of flexibility in how you distribute profits, and it is very inexpensive to set one up. You can do it online and just get off to the races, and you barely have to take your eye off the ball of growing your company, which is probably the biggest advantage to LLCs in the minds of early stage founders. Okay, ownership. How do people or other entities own stakes in these different companies? Ownership in a C corporation is freely transferable, again, predictable. They can issue different classes of stock, which is very appealing. There's common stock that's owned by the founders. Preferred stock is usually what investors buy when they put money in. C corporations can issue stock options to employees, which is something that early stage founders should take into account. Sometimes they don't think that far down the road. I'm going to need to hire a CTO. How am I going to compensate that person? I want that person to be incentivized to stick with the company. Stock options are the gold standard in employee equity compensation, and only corporations can issue stock options. There are significant tax advantages to the employees, which we won't go into in detail, but they're there. If a key member leaves, if a key shareholder leaves a corporation, that doesn't affect the existence of the entity itself. And an LLC can't issue stock options. You try to get around it. There are ways to give employees and other folks equity compensation, but it's tricky, administratively burdensome, and it's not always ideal for the employee. So again, I would say that some founders make this decision without considering this. They don't consider the fact that, okay, in a year, I'm going to have a CTO, I'm going to have a chief marketing officer. I'm going to want to retain this person, but as an LLC, it's going to be a little bit trickier to do that. Transferring ownership in an LLC can be very complicated. It can be addressed in an operating agreement, but it can be tricky. And again, if a key member departs an LLC, it could signal the end of the company. Taxation. This is an area that's usually seen as a plus for the LLC form, and I think that's correct in a lot of ways, but I want to point out a few things that might change your thinking on that. A C corporation is a separate taxable entity, independent from its stockholders, which results in this phenomenon of double taxation, which you've probably heard of. Profits of the corporation are taxed at the corporate level, and then when they're passed on to shareholders in the form of dividends and distributions, they're taxed again. So that's not ideal. It's seen as kind of an onerous aspect of a C corporation. C corporations often pay higher state franchise taxes, but also you should consider the fact that capital gains tax rates are generally lower. They've become lower in recent years, and that kind of mitigates this double taxation concern. LLCs are pass-through for tax purposes, so the earnings are only taxed once. If they pass through to the members, the owners of the LLC. LLCs can elect to be taxed as a C corporation or partnership, so you have that flexibility again. And LLCs can specially allocate income or losses among their members. And related to the first point, losses at the entity level can be passed through to the members. And early stage companies often anticipate, okay, I'm going to have losses. I want to be able to pass through those losses to the members so that they can benefit from the taxes. C corporations can't do that. So again, that's a legitimate reason to be an LLC. I'm trying to resist our bias here at RevRoad because we're generally in the business of working with scalable companies that want to have VC funding at some point in their life cycle. So we do have a bias for C corporations. Many of our companies come in as LLCs and then convert to a C corporation at some point, which is totally fine. And there are benefits to being an LLC in the very early stages, and this highlights one of them. Fundraising, this is the big one in my view, for C corporations, for being formed as a C corporation either at the outset or converting fairly early in the life cycle of the company. Institutional investors like VCs, they definitely favor C corporations. That's because it's very natural for C corporations to issue different classes of stock. VCs are going to want preferences over the common shares of stock that founders have. They want special rights. That's very natural, it's normal, it's part of the C corporation. Simpler due diligence. So the due diligence process is a lot more predictable. You know that there's a general framework within which a C corporation's documents are going to be drafted. The rights and preferences are going to be, again, within a certain, within set parameters. With an LLC, it's very different. You have to look at the operating agreement, you have to look at state law sometimes to determine what am I buying if you're an investor. And that can be very onerous, and it really will. I actually haven't seen any case in which a VC was willing to invest in an LLC to a large extent, and these are some of the reasons. The last one on the list is one that is a big deal. A lot of our founders aren't familiar with this, but they should be, and we talk about this quite a bit. It's the Internal Revenue Code Section 1202. It's the Qualified Small Business Stock Tax Exemption. It only applies to stock in a C corporation. And what it is it allows, I don't want to go in too much detail here because it's really boring, and I can see I'm losing some of you already. But it is a big benefit, and it's a reason to be a C corporation or convert to a C corporation earlier on in your life cycle. It is a tax exemption if you receive stock as an original issuance from a C corporation, meaning the company gives it to you directly, you don't buy it from somebody else, and you hold that stock for 5 years. At the time of the grant, the company was worth, or the company's assets were worth 50 million or less. Then when the company sells, which is the goal of many of our companies, that shareholder can exempt from his or her taxable income the greater of 10 million or 10 times that person's taxable basis in the asset, in the stock. So that could be a huge tax savings. LLCs don't get to take advantage of that. Members in an LLC don't get to take advantage of that. So no QSBS tax exemption. Due diligence, like I said, is much more complicated. You may have to become an expert in Florida law to understand what you're buying if you're an investor in an LLC. You certainly will want to look at the operating agreement very carefully. So the fundraising really is the main reason why I advise companies to at least be thinking about converting to a C corporation from an LLC. This is my obligatory Seinfeld reference, one of my favorite scenes from Seinfeld. It's talking about conversion, so I think it fits, right? So why not convert from an LLC to a C Corp at fundraising time? And this is a reasonable thought. A lot of founders think, okay, I really like my LLC. It's so simple. I have so much flexibility. I don't have to worry about all these formalities and administrative costs that come with a C corporation. I don't have to worry about double taxation. So a week before I go to raise money with a VC, I'll just start the process of a conversion. And that can happen. I'm not trying to suggest that this is impossible or unworkable, and I've seen it happen, and it's fine. But the thing to keep in mind is that the bigger your LLC is, the more members you have in your LLC, the more investors you have, the more different classes of membership units, the more complicated and expensive the conversion process will be. And we're talking, it could take weeks, if not months. You have to make sure all of the members are on board with the conversion, and it can be difficult or it can be impossible. So that, I'm not saying it is impossible, but it's something to keep in mind. Okay, so why Delaware? Final topic. Delaware is seen as the gold standard for whatever reason, right? We're going to talk about the reasons. Gold standard where you want to register your business, and there are good reasons for it. Delaware has been styling itself as the, and not just styling itself and promoting itself, but actually doing the work to make itself the best destination for corporations, for companies to register. They have simple statutes. They've been doing this for over 100 years. Simple statutes that change very little, and they've got lots of legal precedent worked around them. Robust case law, lots of cases have been brought in Delaware. So that all creates a lot of predictability and peace of mind for companies who are registered in Delaware. They understand how the law is going to work. It's not changing, and it's a real benefit, especially when problems arise. The Court of Chancery is a huge benefit in my view. As a former litigator, the Court of Chancery is comprised of corporate law experts. A lot of these are business people, former business people who have become judges. There are no juries in the Court of Chancery, so if you have a case in Delaware, you know that the person who is addressing your case is an absolute expert, probably knows more about business law than any of the lawyers, any of the litigants. That creates a lot of predictability and a lot of peace of mind, again, for companies who are registered in Delaware. It's a huge benefit. Delaware also makes sure that the administrative process of registering there is relatively simple and inexpensive. You can do a lot of it online. Delaware also doesn't charge businesses that are registered there but doing business in other states that don't have operations in Delaware. They're not charged state income tax in Delaware. They may only charge an annual franchise tax, which is going to be generally a lot less than the state income tax rates. All right. I assume we're much before 11:45. Any questions about this? Happy to try to answer a few questions. And then we can talk to the Primo Golf guys who will be much more entertaining and interesting.
I had fun.
Thanks, Joel. Is there a line in the sand as an LLC owner where, with minimal number of members, you would recommend moving from an LLC to a C Corp as far as revenue? Is there a line in the sand that you might recommend for that?
No, and I'm not a tax expert, but I don't know of any line in the sand. As far as the number of members, the thing to keep in mind is the more members you have, the harder it is going to be for everybody to be on the same page as far as the terms of the conversion, how the equity is going to transfer from the LLC to the C corporation. That's what I would say. At some point, if you're, as far as revenue, the line in the sand might be when you're revenue positive, then you don't have any more losses to pass through. That could be a triggering time event for a conversion. Got Nyland.
As someone who signed her C Corp conversion documents yesterday, in Utah, can you just help me understand how great the benefit is of doing Delaware over Utah? I mean, I had my reasons for doing Utah, but what are the things that I should look out for as a Utah C Corp?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a Utah C corporation. It won't likely prevent VCs from investing. Some might have a policy, and a lot of them will have a preference for a Delaware C corporation. But you're still going to have a lot of the same benefits of the corporate form. You're going to have the QSBS treatment that's not specific to Delaware. You're still going to have it's going to make you have shareholder and board meetings regularly, all of which is important for VCs when they come in. They want to see that you've been running your company according to all of those formalities. You're jumping through the hoops. You're making sure that your corporation has a separate legal existence by having those meetings and keeping the minutes to them. So, yeah, I'm not trying to suggest that Delaware is the only place where you can have a successful C corporation. It's just typically seen as kind of the gold standard. EJ.
Joel, nice job.
Thank you.
What are some of the problems, without naming names, that you've seen in the past of companies that did this wrong, and what happened? What occurred?
I can't answer that question without naming names. So next question, please. No, just kidding. Yeah, waiting too long to convert while planning on converting all along, and then realizing, oh, this is going to be really costly. It's going to take way more of my time than it should. And it caused the business owner to take their eye off the ball of growing the company because the conversion was just all-consuming, getting all the members on board, members of the LLC, making sure they're all comfortable with it, and it just can take a lot longer. It can be relatively simple if you have just a handful of members. I think Nyland, yours was relatively simple, right? It was easy enough. Sorry, I named a name, but it was in a positive light. But I have seen that, and it can come as an unpleasant surprise that all this conversion is not nearly as simple as I hoped. All right, thank you, everybody.